Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to our video lesson, our next video lesson actually. We're going to be talking about the repetition structure still. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the while statement, the for statement, and the do statement. So C#, Windows Forms application. Let me go ahead and double click over here. We're still talking about C#, right? C#. This is going to be repetition. And we're dealing with part 6, and specifically I'm going to show you the difference between while, for, and do. Now there are these 3 repetition structures that we use, and they can be used in different ways. First I'll just kind of explain in general how we use them and how they're all in common, and then I'll show you the differences. So first let me go ahead and place a number, a label, and a text box. Let me open this up just a little bit. And I got to make all these guys 12 points because my eyes are getting bad. All right, I got to go see the doctor here. So I'm going to go to font size, 12 points for each of these. The label will also be 12 points. I'm going to move the label to the upper left-hand corner, and I'll change the text property specifically so that it says enter an integer. Let's go ahead and place the text box right there and the button right here. Something like that looks good. In terms of the text property for the button, we'll say this is submit. And then of course I have to place a label at the bottom, so I'll just take this guy, copy and paste it. Let me change the auto size to false, border style to fixed single, and I'll just simply resize this guy, something like this. I want to make sure that the text is centered, so text align, middle center to align the text within the label. And then of course for the text, let me get rid of it, so let me just backspace after I select everything. Resize the form. Let's get rid of the minimize and the maximize button. So minimize and maximize box, will set those both to false. And instead of form 1, I'll say repetition structures. Repetition structures. All right, let me go ahead and give names to the various items. So let's go over here to the top and let's double click. This will be txt user num. This will be btn submit and lbl result. All right. Let me go ahead and double click on the button so that I can start working on the code. And the first thing, of course, that we have to do is to enter our comments, such as declarations, get, user input, calculation, or shuns, output. All right. What does the user give to me? What do I give to the user? It looks like the user is going to give me some sort of an integer, and I'm going to give them an output display based on that integer. So I'll say int user num, because that's a whole number that they're going to give to me. I'm also going to have a string that I'll call output, and I'll set it to nothing. Let me also work with a counter. Because I'm going to be working with the repetition structure, specifically looping so that I can display several asterisks, say for example, a row of asterisks based on what the user wants. All right, so that means I'm going to go over here to get user input. User num is going to be convert dot to int 32 txt user num dot text. All right, so I have the user num. Now, in terms of the calculation, let me go down here, and I'm going to type in the following comment. Let me see a bunch of these asterisks. This is an example of the while statement. Specifically, the while statement is known as a pre-test looping structure. Later on, we're going to be working with the for statement. So copy, paste, we're going to be working with the for statement. That also is a pre-test looping structure. And then finally, I'm going to demonstrate the do statement, that is referred to as a post-test looping structure. So let me demonstrate all of these. All right, so first let me go over here into the while statement. And whenever you're dealing with a looping structure, you always have to have some sort of a starting point. Well, in this case, we'll say that our starting point, which is the counter, we'll set that to 0. Within a while statement, you have to have some sort of a predicate or Boolean instruction indicating what the criteria is for how many loops you're going to perform. So in this case, we'll say counter, and then we'll say as long as that is less than user num, and we'll take the output, assign it to the old output. We'll concatenate that with a simple asterisk. And then we'll say counter plus equals 1. So that's how we are going to continue to loop one by one as long as the counter is less than user number, and we start off with the counter equal to 0. Now, when we're done, I want to have a statement something like this. I'll say, okay, let's take that output statement, that output string. I'm going to concatenate this verbiage. I'll say this is an example of the while output, and then I'll go to the beginning of the next line. So environment dot new line is in essence like me pressing enter in this string to go to the beginning of the next line. All right, I am not finished, but I'm going to go to the output section and say lbl result.text, and I'll send to it whatever the value of output is. Okay, again, we still have to do these two sections. We're not done, but let's just see what happens at this point. So let me save all, start, and let's see what happens when I enter the number 5. Okay, so I enter the number 5. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. That's good. Let's see what happens if I type in 7. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stars. That's good. And this is an example of the while statement. I tell you what I don't like. I don't like this font, first of all, and I don't like that there's not a space right there. So let me go ahead and close this. And I'm going to change some things around. First of all, let me just put a space right there. Second, I'm going to go back over here to the design form, and it looks like I'm going to have to make that label a little bit taller because I want to be able to fit 3 loops in there. One for the while, one for the for, one for the do. And also, let me change the properties as well. I don't like that particular font. I want a monospaced font. A monospaced font means that it's a font where all of the spacing is the same. Let me just give you an example. If I type in the word width, okay, notice the letter W and notice the letter I, they both receive a different width. The letter W, that's pretty wide. The letter I is just a little tiny sliver. But if I choose a monospaced font, so let me go back over here to the font property, and let's see here. Actually, I could just simply click this ellipsis right here where it says font. Click this button. That's going to give me the font dialog. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the top and look for Courier. And there it is, Courier New. And let's beef up the font size to, maybe that's too big, 20 points. Okay, that looks good. Notice that in a Courier font, or Courier New, this is called a monospaced font. The width of the letter W is identical to the width of the letter I, which is identical to the width of any letter or any character. That's the whole point of a monospaced font. Everything gets the same width. So now, let me go ahead and get rid of this text. And let's run the program. And let's just see what happens now when I enter the number 5. All right, so that's obviously too big because the while word got sent to the second line. But you can see here how I think this is a better type of font for this type of an output, a monospaced font. So I think what I'll do is I'll just change the size. It's a little bit too big. And let's see what happens with 14 points. Run it again. Put the number 5. Okay, that's pretty good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A little space right there. This is an example of the output from that while statement that we created. Okay, so now that I have that situated, now let's go ahead and work with the for statement. So the for statement is just like the while statement in terms of its output. It reproduces I'm sorry, it repeats over and over and over again, but it consolidates all three of these items. 1, 2, and 3. These three items within the while statement are consolidated within the first line of the for statement. Specifically, you would say for, and then counter. We'll set that to 0. As long as that counter is less than user num, and then semicolon counter plus plus. All right, what this does is it says the counter is going to start at 0, just like we did over here in the while statement. As long as the counter is less than user num, right, just like the while statement, as long as the counter is less than user num, then we can go in here and execute the loop body. All right, once we've done that, then I can increment the value of counter. So that's what counter plus plus equals. A counter plus equals 1 is the way that we have incremented over here. And I could do that over here, by the way. I don't know what that's all about. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. And no more messages. All right, let's do this. Plus equals 1. I could do that, right? So counter plus equals 1 or counter plus plus, it's the same thing. All I'm doing is just making it so that I am incrementing 1 by 1 for each loop iteration. All right, and then over here in the output, all I have to do is simply type this. So I just copied and pasted it, and this is what we're going to be doing over and over and over again. Now, when we are done, I think I'll just simply take this message over here, copy, paste, and this will be an example of the for statement. All right, let's see what happens. So I'll type in the number 5. This was the generation of the while statement. This was the generation of the for statement. I don't like that this is center aligned. I should have left it top left. So let me stop this, go back over here, select that label, and make the alignment top left. There we go. Now, let's see what happens when I run the program. Type in the number 5. Yeah, that looks good. So these 5 stars were generated from the while statement. These 5 stars were generated from the for statement. Of course, I can enter any other number that I want. I'm simply trying to show you that I can do the same thing with the for statement that I did with the while statement. In general, programmers like using the for statement when you're working with arrays, which is something that we're going to talk about later. And then the while statement has just been around for a long time. I'm very comfortable with the while statement, so I tend to use that more often. Is there a time where I should use this more and above this? Perhaps there is, but really it's a subjective choice. When I first started learning Fortran years ago, I started off with the for statement. But the while statement can be just as effective. It does the same thing in terms of the output. The one thing that I will say about the for statement is that it is nice in that you consolidate everything like this. Where here in the while statement, you have to break things up into 3 different parts, which is really not that big of a deal. That's really the only difference that I can propose to you. And then finally, we have a do statement. So let's work on that, which is another type of looping structure. You type the word do, and then you type in, actually, let me just show you something in Visual Studio that's kind of cool. When I type in the word do, you'll see over here it says tab twice to insert the do snippet. All right, so tab, tab. And so it gives you a little code snippet so that you don't have to do so much typing. This is the basis of the do while looping structure. It's referred to as a post-test looping structure, and I'll explain why. First of all, the criteria is that the counter must be less than the user num. If that's true, then we're going to go back again and do this particular loop body. Well, what is that loop body? It's really the same thing as this over here. In fact, let me just copy and paste it. It's the same thing as the while statement, that we perform some sort of an output, we increment the counter, and then we ask if whether or not we're going to do this again. Once we're finished, let's go ahead and indicate that this is a new line, or that this line belongs to the do statement. So I think I'll just take this guy over here, copy it, paste it here, and put a semicolon. I don't need to go to the beginning of the next line, so I'm going to stay right here with the for statement. Let's run, I'm sorry, not the for statement, the do statement. Let's run this program to see what it looks like. So I'll click Start, and I'll type in the number 4, say, for example. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Interesting, look at that, only 1 dot over here. Well, the first thing that I see that I forgot to do is I forgot to establish the counter. So over here for the while statement, before you execute, you establish a counter. I didn't do that for my do statement. So over here, we go back and introduce a counter equal to 0. Then it will do this a certain number of times. Let's see what happens. So I type in the number 4. Yep, there it is. Okay, let's talk about the do repetition structure a little bit more so that you get a better understanding of why we call this a post-test looping structure. First of all, notice that I execute this line first, then I execute, and it says, I want you to do this. What do you want me to do? I want you to do this, and I want you to do this. Notice that there was no criteria to do this. You're just simply being asked to do it. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter into the loop body and do this because there is no criteria. But when I get to the end, now there is a criteria of whether or not we will go back and do this a second time. So the do statement, we call this a post test. In other words, you execute the loop body and then you perform a test to determine if whether or not you're going to go back and do this a second time and a third time. Sometimes computer scientists like to refer to the do while statement as run once only, or loop once rather. Loop once only. You're able to loop once only and then possibly a second and a third time and so forth and so on. So what we need to do is to provide a criteria that asks if whether or not we're going to go back to the top and perform this loop body once again. Now if we do, that's only because the counter is less than usernum. Notice the special use of the semicolon. Again, this is only for the do looping structure. You wouldn't do that for a while statement. You wouldn't put a semicolon right here, say for example. Okay. All right. So that's why we refer to this as a post-testing loop structure, because the test is performed after you execute the loop body. Now that's not the case for the for statement and for the while statement. For the while statement, you are not going to enter into the loop body unless you've passed this test. So we call this a pre-test looping structure. What that means is before I actually execute the loop body, I have to first pass the test. If I've passed the test, yes, then you can go ahead and execute the loop body. Same thing for the for statement. Here it is. It's embedded inside the for statement. You have to pass this test. That's why we refer to it as a pre-test as well. You have to pass this test, then you can execute the loop body, and then we go back over here to ask if whether or not you're still true, that is, if the counter is less than the user number. If that is true still, yeah, you can go back and execute this loop body. You keep on doing this over and over and over again. So while and for are referred to as pre-test looping structures because they must pass a test first before executing the loop body, whereas the do statement is a post-test looping structure because you don't perform a test. You run the loop body one time, then you perform the test after running the loop body once to determine if whether or not you're going to do this a second, a third, and a fourth, and so forth and so on. And that's the beauty. Those are the choices that you have when it comes to repetition statements: while, for, and do. Again, let me just run this so I can experience the beauty of my program here. Check that out, right? 5 stars for 5 columns of stars based on the user number with an example of how each of these was generated. This is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.